Okay, everybody, welcome to the session. Mo, can you hear me? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay, boom. So first off, I want everyone to be in the chat. Since most of you have your cameras off, you got to at least be in the chat for me and put it on to everyone so I can see what's going on. So, a lot of people ask me, why am I in Sweden, which I actually live in Stockholm about half the year. And part of the reason I live in Sweden is that my family's been coming to Scandinavia for a very long time. My dad is from South India, and when he was an engineer coming out of college, he got a job at an engineering factory. But like a lot of you, he didn't want to be an employee of someone else, right? I think everyone here wants to own their own business. And just like that, 50 years ago, my dad also wanted to own his own business. But, India back in those days, it was pretty much impossible. So he's working as an engineer at a company, and one day he's walking around the factory and he sees this big machine that's not doing anything. It's broken. So, why would you notice a broken machine? Well, on that particular day, my dad noticed that the machine had an address on the side of it, some funny address in some place called Denmark. Does anyone know where this place Denmark is? I've never heard of it. So neither had he. But he decided to do something pretty wild that day. He decided to write that company in Denmark and basically say to them, hey, India's a poor country. Your machine's broken. You really need to teach me how to use it. And he sent the letter off to this Danish company, never expecting a reply. But about a month later, he gets a letter back, and letter says, yes, we will teach you how to use this machine. And yes, we'll pay you like 500 crowns a month while you're in Denmark. But, and there's always a but, we won't pay for your plane ticket. So back in those days, he had, zero money, so he could never afford a plane ticket. But my dad was very entrepreneurial, even amongst other entrepreneurs like us. So he decided to sell his motorcycle, which is the only thing he had. Then he borrowed a bunch of money from a family friend. And then he liquidated his dad's entire life savings just to buy a one-way ticket to Denmark. And as you probably can imagine, the story ends well. He worked in Denmark, in Germany, in Canada, in the US, 10 years all around the world, saving enough money to start his first business. Which brings me all the way back to why we're here today. You can probably imagine I've been going to Denmark since I was a kid and been familiar with Scandinavia, and that's how I ended up eventually in Sweden. And also, if you think about it, if my dad had access to early stage investors and the know-how of how to fundraise like you are about to, and maybe some of you do, he would never have had to wait 10 years to start his first business. And I don't want you to wait 10 years either. I want you to be able to start raising money for whatever company you're working on as soon as you're ready. And that's what this workshop is about. But it's not just about a good story about my dad and what he did. I've have a lot of experience in this area. I didn't learn it in business school. I've sold over $3 billion of companies as an investor and an entrepreneur, raised and invested about $700 million. In addition to that, I've raised $250 million for my recent startups, and I've sat on 7 boards of directors ranging from companies 50 million to 2 billion. So I've seen this firsthand. I've made all the mistakes myself. And so I really don't want you to make those exact same mistakes. But I also want to let you know that if I can do it, you can do it. Because when I was growing up, we lived in a $200 a month apartment in Racine, Wisconsin, which for most of you is probably considered the middle of nowhere. And I've had a lot of challenges along the way, a lot of mistakes. My first startup almost ran out of money, et cetera, et cetera. But if you apply these principles I'm about to show you and teach you, you'll have a much better chance of raising money for your company. And I should say I'm an investor in some Swedish companies. Probably the best known one is a company called Xshore. You may have seen it's like the Tesla for boats. We raised about $18 million there in the last about 4 or 5 months ago. And then a company I'm on the board on, Skykick, we raised $130 million in September. So the same principles I'm about to show you, we've used to raise about $150 million over the past 6 months for companies I'm intimately involved in. These exact same principles. But before we get to that, I sort of told you my why in terms of why I'm teaching fundraising. I want everyone to go into the chat right now. Even if you're asleep, go into the chat right now and just write down why you must learn the fundraising skill set. Why must you learn fundraising? It's not just about the money, right? It's about building your dream. It's about serving your customers. Why must you raise the money? I will wait till someone puts something in the chat, because that's the only proof I have that anyone is awake out there in Jason's metaverse. Amanda says, to move fast and make it big. Excellent. Both those things are very important. I would say moving fast is even more important. Annie says, I need to get funding to kickstart my dream. Absolutely. Excellent. Good. People are jumping in there. So what I want to talk about is what I call the 4-step fundraising formula. So I've tried to break down the thousands of steps of fundraising into just 4. And the first step is pretty simple. The first step is avoiding rookie mistakes. Well, at least it's simple to say. It's not very simple to do. And let me tell you why this is so important to avoid rookie mistakes. If you screw up with a customer, you probably have tons of other customers. You can fix the relationship. You can fix the product. You can do a lot of things. You can say you're sorry. If you look like a rookie, so listen up, folks. If you look like a rookie in front of an investor, you're not going to get any money from them, right? You may never get money from them, because why should someone write you a $25,000, a $50,000, a $100,000 check, a $1 million crown check, if they're not confident that you can use that money properly? It's not just about your business. If you show that you're a novice, it's going to be very hard for you to rebuild that relationship with that investor. So number 1 is kind of like a doctor, do no harm, right? And a common rookie mistake I see all the time these days is, well, so many things with the way COVID has changed things, is that, people are always asking me for Zoom calls on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And if you think about it, why would you want to get on a Zoom call if you're an investor with someone you don't even know? So, and the reason I use that as an example is because it's so prevalent right now in being on Zoom or platforms like this to talk virtually. So my rule of thumb is, if you wouldn't ask someone for a coffee, if you don't know them well enough to ask for a coffee, you definitely would not ask them for a Zoom call. And it just speaks to, it sounds like a small mistake, but what it really speaks to is the misunderstanding of the investor's perspective on you as an entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about that a lot. Similarly, another rookie mistake is sending your pitch deck out randomly. Have you sent your pitch deck out to people that you don't know that well? My guess is you probably have, at least most of you have. Think about it. If your pitch deck is valuable, would you send anything valuable out randomly to someone you don't know? No, you would not do that, right? So why would you send your pitch deck out to someone you don't know as well? It also presumes that the investor is just sitting there waiting for your pitch deck and wants to spend 10, 20 minutes of their time going through it. The answer is, of course they don't, right? It just shows the investor that you have not built the proper investor network to pitch for your investment. Otherwise, why would you be sending it to someone you don't really know if you have other people that want to invest in your company? So just 2 examples of very common stuff. By the way, get in the chat, anyone, and say, is this making sense? Do these rookie mistakes make sense to you? Are you thinking that you want to still do this anyway? Julia says, yes, they're making sense. Okay, good. One person's awake in the chat. Thank you, Julia. Marie says, yes. Sheree says, yes, too. Excellent. Okay, cool. So everything I'm saying here, all right, I want you to think about it from the investor's perspective, because Julia says, of course we're awake. Excellent. Thinking about it from the investor's perspective, because often we think about things from our own perspective, don't we? And that makes sense. I mean, we are who we are. But when you think about things from the investor's perspective, a lot of what I'm saying will make a lot of sense. Okay, here's another rookie mistake that we could probably have a 45-minute class just on this alone, which is trying to raise too little or too much money. Okay, why is too little bad? Too little bad is because you can run out of money. Now, people do this all the time because they want to minimize the dilution that they're going to give up, right? The less you sell your company, the less ownership that someone else has and the more you own. totally makes sense, except for the fact, and that all makes sense if you do everything perfectly. The second one thing gets delayed by a week, a month, usually like 3 months, any delay generally costs a couple months. Then if you raise too little money and you haven't given yourself a buffer, you run out of money and you're bankrupt and you're a zero. So you don't want to do that. Mostly raising too little money is not people that are saying, I want to keep exactly this percent of my company. It's mostly they're overestimating their ability to get traction and revenue, right? If you overestimate your ability, that means things may get delayed. And in startups, time literally costs money because you got something called a burn rate that you got to fund. So that's the concept of raising too little money, obviously a big mistake. But also raising too much money can be a problem as well. And there's many reasons why raising too much money is a problem. One is that if you're trying to raise too much money, you have to go to different types of investors, potentially. Well, I'm hearing like an echo in here from somewhere. Okay, perfect, it's gone. So if you're trying to raise too much money, let's say I'm trying to raise $500,000. That's $10,000, $50,000 checks. I can get my arms around that number, right? Maybe I have 100 people in my network that can all write $50,000 checks, and that would work. But if I'm trying to raise $1 million, $20,000, $50,000 checks, that's a lot of conversations I need to have. So I need a different type of investor that can write $100,000, $250,000 checks. If those investors are not in my network, then it's just not going to happen. So even though you might say, oh, well, let me try to raise $1 million. If I fail, I'll at least get to 500,000. It does not work like that. Okay. You have to choose an amount of money that you believe your investor network can support. The other thing about raising too much money is that, as you probably know, in general, the more money you raise, the more percent of your company you are giving up. And that means that investors, early stage investors, will have more control. They may get a board seat. They may have negative controls. They may be able to force you to do things. They may just be a pain in the ass. So therefore, when you raise too much money, you risk control of your business, which has a whole different set of risk factors on top of the capital. So does that make sense? Sri says, I'm going to answer this question because this is a good one. How much money is Lago? Well, as you can probably imagine, there is no exact formula to that, but I will give you 2 or 3 frameworks to think about. Number one, target 12 to 18 months of cash in the bank at a minimum. Okay, so minimum 12, maybe up to 18, somewhere in that range, because nothing really happens in under 1 year. Now, how do you project that? You have to do your financial projections, and you want to be very, very conservative on any revenue assumptions, right? So maybe you can think about it as that even with 0 revenue, you need to be able to last at least 12 months, right? And if you get a little revenue, maybe it stretches out to 18, something like that. Sri, does that make sense? That's number one. Number two is that you have to think about what milestones you want to hit with your capital, right? So what kind of milestones do you want to hit? Do you want to hit some product milestones, some technology milestones? Do you want to hit some revenue targets, some customer engagement targets? Whatever your milestones are, don't pick too many. Pick, I would say, maximum 3, and figure out how much money that's going to cost you. Now, what if you say, well, Navin, to hit my 3 milestones is going to take me 3 years. Well, guess what? You got to change those milestones because those are unrealistic, right? You got to make them more short term. So then when you go to your next round of investors, you can say to them, hey, look, I raised this much money. I chose these 3 milestones. I hit all 3 milestones. I deserve to raise the next round. You're not going to say those exact words, but if you choose milestones that you don't hit, it's going to be very hard for you to go to your next round of investors and say, hey, give me your money, because you didn't do a very good job with the previous money that you raised. Is this making sense, everyone, about how much money you should raise? Get into the chat and be alive, be awake. Okay, Amanda says absolutely. Okay, so those are some rookie mistakes that a lot of people make. Another mistake, I would say, I mean, there's so many rookie mistakes. I could spend a whole 2 hours on it. But another mistake is that people don't really set their fundraising strategy up ahead of time, right? They just like make a pitch deck, they start pitching, and they're learning it as they go. They don't really have a plan. And as many people have said, like Tony Robbins, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So step number 2, I call awaken the appetite. Awaken the appetite, which really just means engaging your investor network, enhancing it, augmenting it, engaging it, getting it ready in order to raise that capital. And here's a couple other mistakes people make in step 2. One mistake they make is that they go to friends and family first. Now, this doesn't really sound like a mistake. It doesn't always have to be a mistake, but it often is. And here's why. When you go to friends and family, are you as sharp as when you go to a professional investor? Well, no, you're not, because they're your friends and family. You're depending on their relationship to have that conversation. But when you go to them, you won't really have momentum from separate third-party conversations. You can't say, well, I've talked to a lot of professional investors and we've got this kind of feedback, and you can show you're getting some momentum outside of those close relationships, right? So when you go to friends and family only first, you're not as professional. You don't have other momentum to show them that you're serious. And guess what? If you fail and you don't deliver a professional pitch to friends and family, and they kind of know that, they're going to be pissed at you because you relied on that relationship for money. What's the opposite? The opposite is to get a lot of momentum from your business network, from a couple of professional investors you don't know at all, and from friends and family. And then when you go to them and you got your deck together, you got your plan together, you have momentum from other sources as well, then what happens? They're not saying, I'll do Navin a favor by investing in this company. They're going to say, wow, I'm really happy that Navin offered me the opportunity to invest. I'm fortunate to know him, and I get to invest potentially alongside some other people that don't even know him because they think it's a great business. That dynamic is a much better dynamic than just relying on friends and family. Because guess what else happens? What if you're very, very successful in raising money from friends and family? It sounds great, right? I was so successful in raising money from friends and family, I didn't need to go anywhere else. Okay, well, who's going to help you in round 2, right? They're not quitting their day job to help you in round 2. You need a mix of friends and family and professional angel investors in the early stages. A lot of questions in here. So why don't we go in? Let's see, a lot of questions here. I would encourage everyone in the chat to jump in the chat to take a look at them. Moa, maybe you want to highlight Thorsten, and we'll just try out that feature and see if it works. If Thorsten wants to ask his question live, that's totally fine. Besides, with a name like Thor, I'm sure he's not very shy about asking questions, or at least he shouldn't be. Is that possible, or should we just skip that function? Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Thor.
Okay, great. So the question is, how do you create actually the network of investors? You say you should reach out and you should make sure you pick the right ones, but how do you start if you don't have any at all?
Right. When you're starting from scratch, there's a lot of different ways to create your investor network. One, being in part of this, Uppsala Upstart is certainly a step in the right direction. There are so many conferences. I mean, Slush in Helsinki was this past weekend too. There's so many conferences that are either in person or virtual to get you started on that journey, right? Number one. Number two is that your business network has investors in it. You just may not know them yet, right? And so you have to invest in your business network to try to access those people that you may not know, but are friends of friends within your network. Three, I mean, you previous colleagues, previous bosses, or just your business colleagues in general from previous work, they can also be a source of investors. When you go to industry-related conferences, not like maybe general tech startup conferences like Upstart. But in addition to stuff, Upstart, things like this are probably the most helpful, I would say, could be. But also specific industry conferences also have a ton of investors because, vendors to industries, consultants to industries, they're highly networked and investors do come to those events. But it's not about necessarily like finding that investor and courting them in the corner of the event. It's contributing to your network, right? Investing in your network, not just time, but helping people out. For example, I had a guy in my fundraising program that had spent, years and years contributing to different industry groups. And through that, he gained a lot of investor contacts. But it wasn't because he went out trying to hit up people for money. He was doing that years before he wanted to raise money at all for a startup. So it's kind of like a lot of things in life, right? The more you invest in other people, it comes back to you 10x. So if you haven't done that in the past, the time to start is probably now. On top of that, there's also passive stuff you can do. At the most basic thing you can do, which is not going to get you investors, but at least when they look you up, they know you're a real person, is make sure that you're engaging on LinkedIn. Have your profile up to date, engage once a week. It doesn't take that much time. It takes probably like 5 minutes. Post something else someone shared. This is not a LinkedIn course, but I'm saying that's the most basic thing. Because when people that don't know you look you up, you at least look like you're a professional, you're doing things that are exciting, and that you're moving forward. So I gave you 4 or 5 things. I'll give you another example from a place called Park City, Utah, where I spent half my time. In Park City, Utah, there's only 15,000 people, but there is a group called Park City Angels. Guess how many entrepreneurs were at the last Park City Angels meeting I went to? Well, we got some background chatter here somehow. So Shri says 1,000. No, there were 0, Shri. Exactly. Julia's closer to 3. Why were there no entrepreneurs at the Park City Angels meeting? Park City is known to be a very wealthy place. It's next to Salt Lake City, which has 1 million people. How many thousands of entrepreneurs could have been there? 0 were there. You know what it is? It's called being lazy. That's called being lazy, not creative, and not thinking very well at all. This is not rocket science. If you want to go to meet some angel investors, go to a place called Park City Angels or Stockholm Angels or Stockholm Tech Fest or UPPSTART. That's where they're going to be. But guess what? When people want money, they want to go find investors. They don't want to invest in that network prior. And that will come back and bite you. So hopefully I answered that question in a direct and robust manner. So look, you gotta create the right. I mean, my next rookie mistake, Thor, you asked a perfect question, so I can sort of skip this one. I said, a lot of people say to me, I just need to find the right investor. When they say that, I know they don't know what they're talking about, because you can't find the right investor. Every investor, by definition, invests in companies. They're just not going to invest in your company, because you got to create that right investor by creating your network, right? First, warming it up first, having a good value proposition, a professional pitch, all the things that you have to do. It's not just a magical investor and a magical pitch deck that come together to get you your funding. Okay, cool. Thor, thanks for the question. So in the interest of time, I'm going to just briefly, I talked about friends and family. I think I talked about most of the places that you might want to find investors. So let's go to step 3. So step 2 was awaken the appetite. I'm going to get some water. Here's what I want everyone to do. I want everyone, before we go to step 3, I want everyone to type into the chat. What is one action you can take today to build, enhance, or engage your investor network? Okay? There's 47 people in this room. We should get at least 10 people. The other 37, if you don't type it in there, that means you're not committed to building your investor network. If you can't type something in for 5 seconds, how are you going to go out and build your investor network? So everyone jump into the chat and type in one action you can take. I give you 7 or 8 examples. One action that you can take to build your investor network. Give me 30 seconds to get some water. Okay. Attend open pitch events around you. That's a good one. Send a LinkedIn invite to everyone in here. Nicholas, you got to be careful with that because you don't want to be spamming on LinkedIn. So you have to have a good value proposition for them to want to connect with you. That's what I've learned from my LinkedIn friends that are good at it. David, very good answer. I can reach out to those I know and ask them what kind of events and sources they used to go to and what other investors she knows. Absolutely. Absolutely. All good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Meet your people, make new connections. Excellent. Okay. Good stuff. So step 3. Amanda says, follow up with Navin directly. I'm very flattered, but unless you have something that's directly applicable to me, if you haven't done your research on me and know what I invest in, it's not going to be a very, very fruitful thing, right? So that's the thing from the investor's perspective. You got to look at it from our perspective. I'm not saying that's a bad response, by the way. I'm just trying to be funny and be like, you want to do your research on every single investor that you reach out to. Okay, so step 3, create an attractive investment. Now, I chose those words very, very specifically. I did not say make a pitch deck. I did not say tell me how great your company is. I said create an investment opportunity because that's from my perspective, right? That's from the investor's perspective. Make me believe you have a great investment opportunity. Here's a rookie mistake. Thinking your pitch deck is good enough, okay? Here's another fun one in the chat if you want to put in there. I'm not going to wait for people to respond, but when you pitch me your idea or your company, let me ask you a question. Who do you think your competition is? What hurdle do you need to jump over to get me to invest in your company? Does anyone know the answer to that question? And think about how important that question is if you don't know the answer to that question. You're pitching an investor and you don't know what you're competing against. You don't know what the threshold is for their money. When you play any game, isn't it important to know who your competition is? Isn't it important to know what game you're playing? Amanda says what their interests truly are. That is a pretty good reply, given that I just sort of asked out of the blue. And Amanda, I really appreciate you being so engaged in the chat. So that's a good response. And no one else was even brave enough to reply. That shows me that most people didn't know what the competition is when they're pitching investors. Here it is. I think the investors themselves are the first competitors. Sam, that's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good answer. The answer is, or at least one rule of thumb is, your pitch has to be in the top 1% of every pitch I've ever seen in my entire life. Think about from a dating perspective. If you're trying to find your husband or wife, do you just say, okay, this person's good enough, I guess I'll get married? No. Do you say, Moa's laughing over there. This person's, Moa, do you say, this person is better than the last person I dated? No, you don't, Moa. Oh, maybe you do. I don't know. Or Moa, do you say this person's better than the last 2 people I dated in the last 2 years or whatever time frame? No. You know how it is. You say, is this person better, and maybe significantly better, depending on your dating history, better than everyone I've ever met in my entire life? Plus, is this person better than the person I imagined in my dreams last night, right? I mean, think how crazy that is, right? But that's how people think. And guess what? Top investors, exactly, Sophia says unicorn. That's exactly right. That's exactly right, actually. That's the best answer so far. So top investors, we have access to unlimited deals and the best entrepreneurs. So to get our attention, you have to be in the top 1%. So a mistake is thinking your pitch deck is sort of good enough and then investors are going to love it. But the bottom line is that unless it's in the top 1% of decks that I've seen, it's not even going to get a callback. And he says, can you give a few examples of better you mean besides ROI? I don't totally understand the question, but I'm going to give you a few examples, Annie, of things you can do to make your pitch deck better. As you can tell, the point of this workshop is to give you like 20 things you can do tomorrow to make your fundraising strategy better. MC said, any objective criteria to be in the top 1%? Absolutely not, because every investor has a different criteria, right? Every investor is going to have a different criteria depending on your industry, your stage, what they like, what their pet peeves are. Like for me, you're never going to get me to invest in a consumer mobile app, because I've done that before. I know how hard it is. And so you're never going to be able to get me to invest in that. It doesn't matter if you're top 0.1%. I'm not touching it. So every single investor's criteria is going to be slightly different. The point is, you got to put yourself in a position to win by making your pitch deck as good as possible. So number one, tell an exciting story, right? A lot of you people are, and I love you guys, but a lot of you are just delivering information. Like, do you go to a movie for information? If I tell you, I got a great movie, it's called James Bond. James Bond is super jacked. He wears tuxedos. He fights bad guys. He's driving an Aston Martin. And at the end, he almost dies, but then he wins. And then he has a girlfriend at the end. Is that an exciting story? By the way, is every James Bond movie exactly in that formula? Yes or no? Is every Bond movie in that formula? Yes. So why do we go to see James Bond every time if we know the story already? Is there always an evil villain? Yes. Right? We know the story, but we go anyway. Sarah says, for the effects. Basically, yes. We go to hear an exciting story. Okay? So as entrepreneurs, you got to tell an exciting story too. You can't just be delivering information and data. You got to take that data, take that content, create a narrative, and tell an exciting story. Two, here's one that you can do today that's going to make your pitch deck at least 10% better, maybe 20%, which is that just have one takeaway per slide. Okay? And by the way, your titles on your slide should tell the story. So if you go back to your pitch deck right now, don't do it right now, but if you go back to your pitch deck right now, and then look at your financial summary or look at your investment summary, and it says financial summary on the top, that's not a very exciting title. Something like, 3 times growth over 3 years, or, exceptional customer churn drives growth. There's something that tells me something, right? So one takeaway per slide, and use that title, that very special real estate in the top of your slide to deliver the message of that slide. Okay? Because look, people don't remember that many things. They're going to remember 3 things in 3 days after your presentation. They might remember 3 things that are important about your company. So how can you have 3 takeaways on one slide when they're only going to remember 3 things from the whole meeting, right? So you got to keep it very simple and keep it very high level. It doesn't mean you can't have a lot of great information on your slides, but remember, you got to think about it from a board of director level, 10,000 foot level when you're delivering that pitch. And by the way, your pitch deck is not going to get them to write a check. All your pitch deck does, if you're in that meeting, is to get them to spend another 30 minutes or an hour with you the following week, right? So you don't need to give them your whole life story in the pitch deck. You got to give them what's relevant, what's exciting, what's memorable. You got to tell a good story, and you have to be able to summarize that well. And so few companies do that well. Well, MC, they got to know, like, and trust you, but that's not enough. That's absolutely not enough. That just maybe gets you in the door or gets you a call back. Maybe. Okay? The know, like, and trust is sales. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but that's a very salesy thing. You're not selling here. You're trying to create an investment partnership, right? And that's one big mistake entrepreneurs make. Entrepreneurs think if they're good at selling, they're going to be able to sell investors. It's not the same thing. Investors are a different animal, and you're not going to sell them the way you can sell a customer. Now, if you're a naturally good salesperson, can you become good at selling investors? Of course. I mean, someone who's going to be better at sales can be better at, selling the security of their company. But there's many, many, many things you got to do to get investors' capital in your pocket. Okay. But MC, thanks for bringing that up. So we got 9 minutes left. So I think what I'll do is I'll just give you one example. I mean, I did this Jason knows I did this as a 2.5-hour workshop at Epicenter 2 weeks ago. So I'm trying to go through in 45 minutes. Jason, I should come down to you in Uppsala next time I'm in Stockholm and do it for you guys too. It was a lot of fun. Let me give you one example. So all of you are going to have a market slide in your presentation, probably, right? You should. So, but the question you need to be answering on your market slide is, why is your market exciting? Okay. Most market slides out there, I got numbers. I have, unrealistic numbers. I have graphs. I have data. Don't give me data. Spoon feed me why your market is exciting. Back it up with a little bit of charts and data, but I don't need to know everything about your market on one slide. If it's so important, you can put it in the appendix. But on that market slide, you got to think about, why should an investor be excited about your market? Don't inform them about your market. Excite them about your market. It's a totally different thing. It actually is a different part of the brain, right? You need to get them excited. Otherwise, they're not going to listen to you at all. This goes for every slide, but I just want to give the market slide because you guys are all going to have it in your deck. Okay. And step 4, Annie says, trigger the emotional. Absolutely, Annie. 100%. Why do we buy certain clothes? Why do we buy certain perfumes in the airport? They always have celebrities. When I flew back, they had all these celebrities selling perfume. Does it smell any better because Scarlett Johansson is promoting it? Probably not. But do we get excited because she's famous? We probably do, and that's why they have her, right? It's like anything else. Now, Annie, I want to make sure you understand that it's not just like getting investors excited is going to win the deal, but that's part of it, right? That gets their attention, and that helps them digest all the detailed data that you're about to give to them. Step 4 is answer questions and take action. Answer questions, take action. And that's because in order to get investors' money in your bank account, or your company's bank account, hopefully, you got to keep momentum for your deal, okay? So you have to keep momentum from that first pitch all the way through the diligence process until funding. So often what happens, and I know you guys have had this experience, where you have a great meeting, everyone's really excited, we want to meet you, and then somehow, they're like, we can't do it this week, and somehow it just dies, right? It happens to all of us, happens all the time. But if you're not creating momentum for your deal, it's going to happen more often than not, and you're not going to close your round, right? So how do you create momentum for your deal? Well, I break it down into 4 M's. There's basically 4 ways I see that momentum occurs in a transaction. 1, market. 2, metrics. 3, money. And 4 is a catch-all I just call magic, right? So basically, as you're going through the deal process, what is changing about your market that you can ping an investor and say, hey, look at this exciting thing that happened, to keep them on the hook? Or you say, hey, we just launched a new product. Just want to make sure that you're still engaged in our transaction. We're going to move forward without you. If not, you can always ping people and say, hey, do you have time for another Zoom call? Because we really want to continue the conversation, but there's no meat on that bone, right? You got to give them something to say, hey, by the way, if you don't engage with me, that's totally fine. You're just going to miss this deal because this just happened, or this just happened, or this just happened. Okay. So one classic thing you can do of the 4 M's, money is one, is to let investors know when you're getting traction with other investors, such as, hey, we're getting close to doing allocations. Just want to make sure just want to get a better sense of where you guys are at to understand how we can fit everybody in, right? That just shows that, you're getting traction with other investors. They may get squeezed out of the deal. Things like that, right? So you need to be aware of those things so that when things are happening in your business, you're like, oh, this would be a great update for this particular investor. I remember they asked us about competitors. Here's a competitor that just raised $20 million in the same market. That could be viewed as good or bad. We're going to make it good because we're going to say, hey, our market's validated. Someone else just raised $20 million. We're off to the races, whatever it happens to be. So if you have that awareness about what's happening in your business and how that relates to your fundraise, you can use those nuggets in order to create the momentum to make sure your deal doesn't die. So we got 3 minutes left, Moa. So why don't I just take 1 or 2 final questions? I was going to wrap it up with a little story, but I think it's better to just take a couple of questions for folks. Looks like we've increased the number of people the entire time during the session, so that's good. So Sri says, what are the 4 M's? 4 M's, Sri, are market, and you can type in the chat for everyone if you want, Sri. Market, metrics, money, and magic. Those are the 4. So any other questions in here? We have 1 minute left. Well, let me just wrap it up and say, you know, the biggest mistake people make globally is not having a fundraising plan, right? They're just doing things as they're doing them. And by the way, guys, that's not your fault. No one ever taught you fundraising. You know, there'll be some panels with VCs here and there on different conferences, but I've never seen someone teach fundraising in a structured way. That's why I basically did it. So if you want to learn more from me, you can follow me. I'll put it in there at Dream Navin on Instagram. I do have a fundraising program. I don't offer it in Sweden, unfortunately. But if you ping me on Dream, if you're really aggressive and ping me on Dream Navin, I'm sure we can get someone on my team to write you back. But follow me on Instagram. I have tons of reels, tons of posts on fundraising, and I hope you enjoy it. Sophia says, do you think that creating an event for fundraising money is a good idea? Yes, Sophia, I did one of those for about 50 people in the US in September, and I have one that I teach online as well, in addition to workshops like this. So if you follow me at Dream Navin, I have a lot of stuff on there. And yeah, I do. And Sophia, there's nothing like it out there, and entrepreneurs get killed because they don't understand how to fundraise. So I hear you. I hear you. Mo, are we done? Is it over?
Yes. So should we
Okay.
talk about the speaker lounge thingy?
Okay, go for it.